So this is basically like a field of research now being referred to as circadian biology, and it's a very exciting field. And I'll preface by saying I think it still matters more what you eat than when you eat, but when you eat does have an impact on your health, we're starting to see. A lot of this research is being spearheaded by a researcher named Sachin Panda over at the Salk Institute, who's a great guy. I mean, I'm sure he'd love to come on your show. Brilliant dude who's really elucidating a lot of what we are now starting to understand about the relationship between our bodies and time. And so as diurnal creatures, I think what the research is starting to show is
diurnal means eating during day.
Eating during the day, yeah. I guess as opposed to being a nocturnal creature, it's, like a mouse would eat primarily at night. And so, yeah, I think what the research is starting to show is that, if you accept that what you eat is still plays a bigger impact, eating late at night seems to dysregulate our peripheral circadian clocks. So we have clocks in our bodies, if you can picture that. The primary one is in a tiny region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, within the hypothalamus, which is like the most primordial region of the brain. And it interfaces with proteins in our eyes called melanopsin proteins. And when we are exposed to daylight, it basically sets forth a 24-hour timer. And that dictates when we are to be at our most alert, our most coordinated, our most balanced. It interfaces with our digestion, our enteric nervous system. So, it's the reason why peristalsis ramps up when we first wake up. Most people will have a bowel movement in the morning. It's not happenstance that happens. It's just that's when all the processes in our body are sort of ramping up to basically stack the odds in our favor for the day ahead so that we can be at our most energetic, our most focused, seek out new foraging opportunities, find new campgrounds, maybe find a mate for those of us that are unpaired. And so that's why morning light in through the eyes seems to be so important. Now, from the standpoint of food, we have peripheral clocks, and those clocks are primarily in our digestive system because other than the input that we get through our eyes, which alerts our brains as to the time of day that it is, the other major input is like when we're eating. And it seems to be the case that when we eat too late at night, which is not when we're really meant to eat, because once the sun goes down, prior to the advent of artificial light, we would start to secrete a hormone in our brains called melatonin, which would make us typically get sleepy. And, we would tend to probably sleep not too long after dusk. Today we have artificial light, and so we're, awake at all hours. The modern world has become the equivalent of like a Vegas casino. But so if you accept that one of our ancestors, for the vast majority of our time on this planet, would have gone to bed soon after sundown, then the fact that we're now eating well into the night, like right up until the moment before we typically go to sleep, that leads to some degree of asynchrony in these peripheral clocks. And so what the research is starting to show is that, eating too late at night can have a negative impact potentially on various cardiometabolic markers like blood pressure, blood glucose. It seems to perpetuate next day hunger, not to a massive degree, but that there's at least one study that I'm thinking of, and I can send you the reference. I forget the journal that it was published in, but it found that for people who ate very late at night, they had an increase in next day hunger. They consumed more calories, and they actually saw a drop in their resting metabolic rate the next day. So they burned fewer calories as well. So for me, what that basically entails, and there are all these other interactions, between, for example, insulin, which is the fed hormone essentially after we eat. Generally, we see a rise in the hormone insulin. There's a relationship between insulin and brain health. There's an enzyme that degrades amyloid beta in the brain, which is a plaque that's associated with Alzheimer, or a protein that's associated with Alzheimer's disease that gets degraded by an enzyme called insulin-degrading enzyme. As the name implies, it also exists to break down insulin. So we're just at the very tip of the iceberg, but it doesn't seem to be in our benefit to eat too late at night. And so the advice that I give generally is very simple: is just stop eating 2 to 3 hours before you go to sleep. And And I think that's helpful in light of this burgeoning, field of study known as circadian biology. If you eat, close to bedtime, it's not a big deal. And it also ultimately, I think for pretty much everybody is going to depend on what goals are. So, I mean, there are some studies where, they'll give people who are focused on building muscle protein before bed, and they see that it actually increases overnight muscle protein synthesis and reduces muscle protein breakdown. So you have to kind of like take all of these different studies and synthesize them, and just at the end of the day, pick and choose and kind of see like what your goals are.
Right.
So I try not to make any like sweeping recommendations, because, if you're on a vigorous resistance training routine, as I am personally currently right now, there might be value to eating protein late at night or before you go to sleep. But for your average person who's eating 16 hours a day, there does seem to be some value in constraining that feeding window to, maybe an hour after you wake up is when you have your first calorie, and then cut it off 2 to 3 hours before going to bed. That also has the benefit of assisting with calorie control. A lot of people do see benefit from intermittent fasting from the standpoint of weight. It's not magic. It's not better than calorie restriction, but it does seem to provide a parameter for people to help them better control their calories. Also, we tend not to eat very healthful things after dinner anyway. Like the foods that most people tend to eat while watching TV after dinner tend to be all ultra-processed snack foods. So for a lot of people, it seems to be it's a really helpful means of just controlling calories and achieving better body composition as well.